In the darkness before dawn, we can see, if we care to look, that far below us there is a city covered by thick cloud, reflecting warm light back onto homes and offices like a giant heat lamp. We need not be hampered by these opaque vapors. Our powers are such that we can watch this story unfold from whichever perch we choose, looking down upon a man who is to be affected by a series of circumstances and the consequences born of his responses to them. So let us observe this man. He is within a dream, visited by significant people from his life so far, such as ex-lovers and his father and mother, long separated, who present as ghosts. He knows they are talking about him, but he cannot hear what they say. And then he is in possession of a cheque for a large sum of money given to him by his dad. But every time he tries to cash it, he fails, and these people turn away from him. Sorrow and anxiety course through his blood, and he awakes and knows he will not return to sleep. Like a soul departing a lifeless body, he rises quietly from the bed, turning to look upon his partner, sleeping sweetly, her eyes behind a mask, her mouth suggesting nothing. So peaceful is her body that he's reminded of a noble lady cast in marble and laid to rest in a medieval chapel. He then leaves the bedroom, naked, still cherishing the caring spirit of his girlfriend and the nurturing comfort that can be achieved with togetherness. In his apartment, he is close to the sky, and he turns towards its orange cast and straightens his back and stretching out his arms and flexing tingling fingers. Around him, deep green against a blood-red wall, are the plants his girlfriend so lovingly nurtures, all named, that relate to the times they brought them together. He leans against cold glass, a surface that now seems a dear to him, covering his skin with a cool, unnatural presence. The roads below are lifeless. It is early, but also a time of deadly infection, causing people to fear the very air they breathe. And all the fortifications of a modern city, the glass blocks, the endless terrace streets, the grand civic buildings, all are useless in their defense against this invisible disease that seeks out the unknowing weak. His gaze falls upon the horizon to the urban skyline, where formal ranks of towers rise from barren car parks and wasteland towards the heavens, shadowing the network of streets below. Their existence driven by a belief that life can be ordered, existence controlled in terms of economic necessity, everybody to be considered a unit of yield. He sees layers of time set out in distinct patterns of architecture all the way back to the start of the city's industrial self. But then it stops, as if time itself has ceased. Can there be nothing more ancient within a city than the oldest building left standing? Are modern Athenians more or less connected to their ancestral warriors and philosophers, to actual gods by the retention of their monuments? Or could there be a spiritual legacy carried within them, within us all, through the ages, forged by stories told, reinforcing a constant set of defining characteristics? He wonders if, for him to return to myths and legends, to inspiring imagination, he must leave the city limits to landscapes that are, to him, beyond comprehension. The dream he had floats once more through his temple, pressed to the window. He wonders if he will ever reconcile his past, which he seems to carry with him like a curse rather than a blessed necessity. He knows these symptoms, shown to him like a parable in his dream. Self-doubt, feeling rejected, a hapless victim, his body primed to respond quickly with tension, a behavior learned over decades that can surge through his body like floodwater, and he hates it. Tea is made and he looks out once more. Tonight will be a full moon, and although currently invisible, he knows it is there, its power at work on the world, moving oceans, provoking creatures into unusual behaviors. He decides to descend onto the streets, as he often does when unable to sleep, and is soon outside. There is purpose to his metronomic steps as he takes a familiar route. A tune comes to mind and he finds himself humming it as he walks. This city, his domain, is the custodian of so many essential moments in his life. Love, births and death, all experienced here. It has burrowed into his core, is within his veins, so although he's not a native of this place, he is most certainly naturalized. And despite often feeling exhausted by the city, it also energizes him, nourishes him. He feeds from it, sniffing out opportunities like a woodland creature. Now, though, with the population removed from normal life, the city has become reduced, a deserted entity adapting to unprecedented circumstance, diminished like a weakened king by its state of flux and loss. Next to a housing estate just off the city centre, he becomes still amongst a copse of trees. He is charmed by the delicate song of a blackbird chirruping loudly before first light, perhaps disturbed by unnatural illumination. He looks upwards, seeking out the hidden bird amongst the branches, hoping that if he could lay eyes upon it, he could capture the melody forever. In this moment, he relaxes, believing that there will be some kind of resolution, that he'll survive both the anxious infection within his heart as well as the pandemic disease which hunts out the unknowing weak. He takes his phone from his pocket and begins to photograph his surroundings, to store this moment for when his spirits fall and he happens to glimpse the bold yellow beak of the bird and its sleek black feathers. So enthralled is he by this exquisite creature, the attack takes him entirely by surprise. Just beyond the trees had been a figure unnoticed, in clothes of blue and white, head topped by a black cap and bobbing aggressively as if to some internal rhythm. He's only alerted once he hears a distinct call of "Too many pictures" amongst the chattering alarm of magpies overpowering the sweet sound of the songbird. And then 3 bodies are rushing towards him, screaming, threatening, fanning out to block his escape as he panics and runs, driving him, their prey, towards a wall where, for a second, now trapped and rooted to his spot, he supposes, as a vole must feel on seeing the oncoming claws of a hawk, he will be killed by these nameless predators. The black-capped male roars close into his face, threatening to tear his head from his shoulders for not respecting this territory, for simply being there. He offers his phone, thinking this is what they want, but it's not that. There is a primal force within them which must be dispensed, and he is their chosen victim, the unknowing weak. After a while, he cannot tell how long, but during the early wash of daylight, it occurs to him that he could live, and he becomes emboldened, checking their advance. Seething flecks of spittle then fire past his face, and a new concern flicks his primal switch to not be infected by that virus, not here, not in this moment. Every particle of his body is now in communication, neurons pulsing messages of repulsion and survival throughout his twitching nervous system, until eventually he breaks free and their spell is broken, bringing an end to their fury. The night is over. People emerge from nearby houses and drive away to begin early shift work, either indifferent or unaware as to what has just happened. Out here, he'd been on his own. His pulse throbs, and he has to work hard to regulate his breathing, trying to calm his body. A single magpie lands on a nearby branch and regards him carefully as if he is carrion. The three protagonists leave through the trees, chattering amongst themselves, leaving him to recover in soothing, early morning drizzle, feeling more alive than perhaps he ever has before. It is now the evening, and we see that the man is at the edge of a forest on the cusp of night, the moon not yet risen into the dusk. His city, so familiar to him, is now far away. He stands before a solid tree line that contains a drenching darkness beyond, listening to the call of an owl, and he is returned to being a fearful child in his unlit bedroom, where toys become fairy tale creatures and the wardrobe a portal to another world. A wind curls around him like a curious spectre. He looks over his shoulder towards the distant urban plain, a mirage of jeweled lights under clouds the color of tobacco, which sit heavy like an elephant's stomach above a thin horizon of drifting pinks and turquoise. A crowd of rooks emit their bedtime cry and circle the trees away to his right. Always be kind to crows, his nana used to say, for they can remember your face. He feels profoundly separated from his home. Current restrictions mean he shouldn't be there in the forest, and he feels like a fugitive. But he felt unable to resist the compulsion to escape. All day, in shock, the roaring voice of the black-topped man had resonated through his brain, and this, coupled with the tension induced by not knowing if he'd been infected by that virulent disease, released a primal trigger, stimulating a need to flee the depleted city beyond its limits to a place of sanctuary where he could feel cleansed of dread and infection. So, he's chosen this forest, sensing that to become physically lost in an unknown space will liberate him, lead to a transformation of spirit, that somehow this quest will connect him to some bewitching force that might soothe his splintered soul. Fear is a compelling force, and he is ripe with it. His forearms, beneath layers of clothes, bristle, the standing hairs causing his skin to feel sore. As the dregs of daylight evaporate, he knows it is time to enter the forest. He steps over the threshold and into an overwhelming blackness. In the torchlight, he sees his drifting breath, masking pungent ignorance of all that surrounds him. Before him stand cohorts of regimented pines infiltrated by other trees he cannot name. There are fallen trunks on beds of mulching leaves, incrementally decaying beneath creeping lichen, becoming something other than trees, across spans of time his human brain cannot fathom. As he walks, the owl he'd heard seems to track his journey, emitting a strange, monotonous two-part squeaking sound. Cue-whip, cue-whip. In those first few moments, he feels as if he has plunged into deep space, the narrow beam from his light like a celestial zip wire shot across this dense black hole. The dark, like fear, distorts distance, and time appears to flow at a different pace. He is on a narrower path, and he dare not stray from it. Not yet, not in this strange terrain. It's a voluminous world of vague shapes, and although in truth he's not travelled that far, he already feels deep into the woods. He looks down to the forest floor illuminated by his torch, fascinated as he crushes decaying foliage and crunches discarded twigs like a marching giant. As he walks, each step discharges into the ether a memory from this day. Each imprint in the fleshy earth becomes a mark for any archaeologist to discover. The weight and spread of his tread a clue as to his mood and resolve. The owl persists with its stalking call. And soon he begins to find its rhythmic presence reassuring, and his eyes begin to adjust to the dark, which he finds remarkable. In the gloom, he begins to see forms more clearly and perceives that he is in a circular clearing surrounded by great bushy pines swaying in the strong breeze, reminding him of grand generals leaning into one another as if in whispered conversation, discussing his impetuous presence. He feels a sense of judgment hang in the damp air, suggesting that this veteran brigade had somehow observed that morning's events and are commanding that a damning sentence be passed upon his response. Resentful of their insight, he stomps onwards and leaves the established path, rebellious, like a child told he cannot leave his family garden, who then runs out onto the road. Stumbling over uneven ground, his temper rising, the heat of shame oozing from his pores, he leaves behind the pompous trees and soon arrives into a landscape so extraordinary it provokes him to gasp. Silence is the only sound. The owl is gone. He is above a cratered ground clogged with perished trees, piled like bodies shot where they stood, a deranged mess. Tangled brambles and bracken are woven around the sinking copse. He picks and stumbles through contorted remains and dissolving bark, and is reminded of a shelled battlefield of churned mud and destructed life. Such is the chaos around him, his advance is halted, and, overwhelmed, he slumps to the ground, panting hard in the fresh air. He is utterly alone, and the violation of his sleep and the attack at daybreak trembles in his memory. The dreamt recall of his life failings, his fearful flight, his sense of latent death. In the distance across fields he cannot see, he hears a bleating sheep, a mournful sound as if she's calling for her lost lamb. He throws down the torch and thinks of the assault of his shrieking foe with whom he could not reason. Was he a coward in retreat? Less of a man is the tender heart that rests within his chest, so eager to render him vulnerable to victimhood, the unknowing weak. And he weeps. This self-pity inspires resistance deep within his core, and he sees a vision, perhaps his soul, white and fluid, float above him, ready to depart in frustration, and he knows he has the choice to either lie here in the mud or arise to plot a way out of this haunting landscape. He has no idea where he is, but this disorientation is surely what he'd been seeking, his opportunity for redemption. As he casts around for a way forward, he notices in the distance what appears to be a fire. He turns off his torch and in doing so extinguishes the flame. He clicks his flashlight back on and the flame reappears. He repeats this several times until it occurs to him that it's something reflective. He sweeps light across the trees and perceives several pairs of unblinking bright orange eyes staring back at him. Drawn towards this strange phenomenon, he is roused from the earth and sets off towards these ocular beacons, soon retrieving his direction. Joining the route he'd petulantly rejected. The glassy eyes, almost certainly those of wandering deer, are perhaps startled by his nascent resolve, and so retreat and vanish. He looks up to see the sky has become clear, and he attempts to decipher Orion and the Plough, the only constellations he knows. In this moment, he feels connected to all of the ages that have ever been, to his ancestors reading the celestial topography, lost in consideration, smiling with wonder. A steep incline leads him downwards and then up through more pines, the purifying scent from their needles flushing out the congestion of punishing exercise, enriching his nostrils, and then, without warning, he breaks free of the forest and finds himself adjacent to a rolling moor. He leans against an old stone wall and divines a silver glow above a far peak which seems to swell with every second like a valve television coming to life. Slowly, steadily, the white radiance becomes more substantial, pushing light into the meadow before him, and like the dome of a bald man's head, the curved full moon appears, gliding serenely, powerfully, fully into vision, ascending into the sky, casting shadows all about him with its astonishing brightness, igniting the forest beasts who burst into a discordant chorus of bellows and braying, hooting and shrieking. A sense of something turns him around, just in time to see a barn owl, licked silver by moonlight, circle a skeletal tree with measured wing beat, as if waiting for him before swooping towards another section of the forest below that he's yet to explore. Refreshed by this miraculous spectacle, propelled by the lunar force behind him, he adjusts his backpack and rejoins his odyssey, following the airborne trail of that mystical predator. owl is soon out of sight, and the man must again find his own way, now made easier by the moon daubing the trees and paths with a shimmering grey. After a long winding walk, he comes to an expanse of water, gently ribbed with ripples, a blade of shivering particles slicing the surface. It's a transfixing scene, and he pauses. A soft glop startles him as a fish breaks the surface before smartly returning to the lake's hiding depths. He's still as a pillar of salt, contemplating the far-off towns and villages that neighbour his city, just visible as a sulphuric glow above the high hills opposite. The acoustics here cause the slightest sound to resonate throughout the enclosing valley. In this echoing arena, a strange cry comes from the far bank, a curdling shriek that in turn seems to provoke some geese who honk out their harsh call, which reverberates throughout the forest, initiating a cacophony of screeching and growling. A tawny owl joins in, its haunting alto swimming across the air. This strange choir distends the atmosphere, inducing an outburst of primordial grunts of demented, snarling anger, interspersed with a brutal clacking noise like the children of knights fighting with wooden swords, and a further tantrum of noise breaks out as if a scrap has just started in some back alley. As the commotion crescendos to a culmination of profound disquiet, he hears a whirring noise and feels a rush of air pass over his right shoulder, a turbulence so strong it seems as if the earth is being sucked backwards. He instinctively ducks, shielding his head as he does so, spinning around, seeking witness to this ghastly phenomena, but there is nothing, and he doubts himself. Within seconds the world is returned to peace, the beasts quiet, and whatever agitating turmoil that possessed them now ceased. Due to this centrifugal racket, he now has his back to the lake, facing an ordered stack of trees that rises upwards, the moon above the knitted branches delivering dancing shadows at his feet like a shoal of tadpoles. In this stillness, he hears a stream and, beguiled, follows its pattering trickle until he finds himself on a small wooden bridge overlooking a fast-running channel of water. The brook comes between an audience of trees that line a steep cleft between two steep banks, and he thinks he can glimpse stonework on the ridge above. Curious, he begins to climb the grassy slope, pushing his feet into turfy ruts, grasping hold of clumps of stems to help his progress. He slips and cuts his finger on a sharp thorn, a natural dagger that cuts the tip of his finger. He watches as a small globule of blood bubbles up from his skin before dripping to the ground, and cursing, resumes his clambering journey up to the brow of the elevation. At the summit, he discovers an archaic monochrome world, and his face becomes chilled by a lowering temperature. Hanging from a nearby tree is a blue rope swing, reminding him of a noose. Just beyond is a hut made from dark rocks too small to be a dwelling, somewhere for animals to shelter or to store hay. The roof is made of woven twigs and sticks, and the walls have collapsed in places. Over to his right, further on, is a larger stone wall that looks as if it could have been part of a house. Beneath this, there is a wide gap, perhaps once used as a track. It feels as if he's part of a jigsaw with many pieces missing, a magical place where the souls of ancestors still drift amongst the trees, bothering the green grass that floods the uneven ground around him. There is a sheltering canopy of branches above his head which, when parted by a thrittering breeze, reveals stars and planets from millions of years away. To his left is a row of sycamore trees clustered closely together like a family, their roots interlinked and close to the surface. One of the trees has a magnificent cylindrical bough, an extension of its trunk that soars upwards, bending at an impossible angle, defying gravity. It is covered with patchy moss, like the hair of a short-haired dog when touched, and the scent of a damp pantry when sniffed. This area feels inhabited to him. He looks around, expecting to see others come upon him, to be again ambushed by strangers, but no one appears. There is a profound stillness, a zephyr's delicate touch the only disturbance. He allows the deep night to surround him, and, intoxicated by unseen energies, he lies down at the feet of the sycamores, resting his head upon gnarly roots, placing his hands across his chest, as if preparing for the afterlife. The gap in which he lies is snug and his fontanelle pushes up against the bark. He suddenly feels safe, watching hypnotic leaves sway above him, moonlight falling through the gaps and onto his face. His eyelids become heavy, and soon he can no longer tell if he is still awake, finding himself in a pleasant trance, suspended in a world between consciousness and slumber. In the darkness, the world takes on a changed, larger dimension. After maybe seconds, minutes, or hours, he can't tell. He senses a pulse under his body. It's faint and irregular, but like the rhythm of a swollen river, has coherence. And then something extraordinary happens. Like dandelion fluff caught on a summer draft, he's transformed into a drifting spirit no longer anchored within a corporal form. A swirling tunnel opens deep into his mind, and he really sees the inside of his own living subconscious. It feels as if everything that he's ever experienced, felt, or known is flowing up through the peak of his skull, returned now to the condition of a newborn infant, softened, opened, vulnerable. 2 thumbs could split it apart as if it were a soft peach. If we were not so aware of this man's circumstances, it's possible to think that he might simply have come to rest and fallen asleep amongst the trees. However, we have the privilege of being witness to the workings of the cosmos and the complex mechanisms now at work within his human mind and body, and the natural systems he has been connected to. The pulse grows stronger, and he feels splayed out and melded to the very roots he is upon, and that which constitutes him, his enzymes and bacteria, his hormones and chemistry are now being gathered and dispatched via his excited neural pathways onwards through this eternal sylvan system of roots, minuscule hyphae and myriad fungi transporting messages along their vast underworld network, now preparing to connect him to their circuit. The trees, the forest are within his mind, sifting through his life-shaping moments, and it feels like a supermarket trolley dash through his existence as the Earth's hummer seeks to identify what elements help him to survive and what causes him damage. Forest thought begins to enter his limbic system. An exchange of worlds has commenced. subconscious is powerful, and to be given access to its workings is a miraculous risk. It's a paralyzing jumble, a choreographed ribbon dance of 1,000 workers. It's the collision of two oceans. It's a lonely summer meadow under a cumulus sky. It's the autumn leaf fall of 1,000,000 trees. It's a murmuration at dusk. It's a sparrowhawk making its crepuscular kill. It's an unknowable galaxy contained within a mortal skull that will one day join the rotting deposits beneath, a universe occupying a temporary home. As the man floats into this boundless cavern, free as a seed on the wind, he encounters ordered turmoil. Every second of his life is spinning, orbiting, never in isolation, each moment linked to a previous or subsequent occasion, right back to his time in the womb. His fetal self, peaceful, cocooned, drifts past like a giant bubble, and he wants to be that child once again, before birth, before life asserts itself on this innocent bud. Slowly, like a highlight show, more events emerge from the morass. He sees episodes he cannot recall, but which have carved out his personality. His birth in a damp bedsit, his father leaving when he was a toddler, his young mother doing her best to love and avoid destitution, the early illness which nearly killed him. And then things he can remember: the death of his beloved grandfather, his uprooting from the level east coast to the inland hills of the west, his first love's rejection of him, the attack that morning. The tree with its far-reaching network has plugged into his mind, like a mechanic running diagnostic tests on an engine. And then, as if to bring medical balance to this arboreal assessment, he begins to witness simple, joyful times, making pancakes with his mother, the great annual fair, the sound of the sea at dusk, the supernatural closeness he now has with his partner. A clarion vision develops of himself as a small boy in a garden, in t-shirt and shorts, smiling, an expression of pure happiness, his hair golden in the late June sunshine. And then he is striding along a country road, older now, a cloth knapsack slung over his shoulder, heading towards a city of glimmering gold, a distant El Dorado. Fragments of his soul are transfused with calming sap through gossamer threads, a giant organic embroidery where flickering filaments distribute their goodness throughout his capillaries on an epic vascular journey. Mycelium home in on his anxieties and his diminishing memories, with depictions of fear instigating the most frenzied interest. He is dissolved, existing purely as a state of mind, borne along by a palpitating caravan of microscopic spores. A bouquet of decay swells his nostrils, infecting him with euphoria. Lost in the wonder of it all, he considers that he may actually be dead, although he can clearly sense the tree, which seems very alive. Everything is beyond comprehension. What on earth has happened? As if the question has been heard, he discerns a figure coming towards him through the trees, but this time he doesn't turn to run. He cannot move away, but he doesn't want to and must respond accordingly. What are you, he thinks? Are you man? Woman? The stranger replies, Not a sound has passed between them, and yet they are communicating, talking via some powerful, unseen force. So what has happened? He feels calm, at odds with who he was in the morning.
Everything that has happened to you, what you have done, has led you here. You are nigh of that sycamore.
The canopy of leaves far above murmurs as if in agreement. And why? How are you here?
In one of my lives, I used to live here, in Parting Gap, as it was known then, a farm. No trees were here except for those you came upon to rest. I used to embrace this sycamore, rest my cheeks upon its bark, whisper to it. I too became of the tree. It is hundreds of years old, as memory, and when you triggered its internal system, it released its sense of me, a human like you. It cannot tell us apart. It simply has some awareness that we are the same species. We are conversing through the tree. It will always now have some trace of your visit.
Why were there no trees? What happened?
You think a forest is simply about tree, but our forests were created by kings. It is about the laws of control rather than the word. A judicial system used to exclude those not deemed worthy by our rulers. You came here thinking this place was one of sanctuary, an ideal. We humans are arrogant, thinking our lives are the most important, believing we must control and exploit our lands. We see these trees as something to be controlled, life in terms of profit. I was guilty of that too, in my own small way.
The stranger pauses.
I could show you the nobleman hunting the stag, men hung for trespass. We are all either prey or predators. The vole knows it may be killed and behaves accordingly. A tree sees centuries, modifies the pace of its growth, but always accepts that it will die. I see you were touched today, and you felt like a victim. You grow strong and survive like the sycamore. You need to anticipate your surroundings and perceive why you are the prey. Your predators this morning, living an unfortunate life, do not need your pity. They need your understanding. Your strength lies beyond merely begging for mercy, which further enraged them.
Is this what the sycamore has been trying to tell me? He receives no answer, though. The dawn has begun and pale sun begins to lessen the darkness, causing the figure to fade and then evaporate. The spell is broken. The man opens his eyes, sits up. He is covered in the forest. He touches his scalp. It's hard as the rocks beneath his feet. Corvids roam on high, coughing their rasping calls. He gives silent thanks to the birds, as if he believes that they have protected him and are carrying the kernel of his spirit back to his own peculiar habitat. He rises to his feet, ready to begin to journey home. As he walks, the signal is restored to his phone and a message from his partner arrives. Whilst you've been away, a magpie has been sitting on the ledge. It seems to know you are gone. I love you. He no longer feels like prey. It is time to return to the city, to his home. Big applause for the musicians. Played all that off the top of their heads. Thank you.